morning, everyone. I'm Dimple Ajmera, Charlotte City Councilwoman at large. I'm also I'm chair of the Triple E Committee, the Environment, Engagement, and Equity Committee. We have a packed agenda today, so let's get started with some introductions, starting with committee members and then moving to city staff.
Good morning, Renee Johnson, Vice Chair.
Good morning, Braxton Winston, committee member.
Good morning, Sarah Hazel, Chief Sustainability and Resiliency Officer.
Good morning, Tim Porter, Chief Urban Forester.
Good morning, Rebecca Hefner, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Good morning, Federico Rios, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Allison Craig, Planning.
Good morning, David Wolf, Deputy Director with the Department of General Services.
Good morning, Beverly Sanders with Charlotte Communication and Marketing.
All right, did we cover everyone?
We did.
All right, thank you. Well, we have 3 items on our agenda today that touch on some very important work that committee has done so far, ranging, well, those 3 topics range from protecting and preserving our tree canopy and how we approach equity as a city council and community engagement. So first item is Charlotte's tree canopy. And our goal today is to be very efficient. So I'm going to hand it over to our city staff to get us started. But before I do that, let me just say a few words about the first item, our tree canopy, something that is near and dear to my heart, as many of you know. This is a referral from our last strategy meeting. And I know that Mr. Winston had asked for this referral. So thank you, Mr. Winston, for your continued advocacy on our tree canopy. The goal here is to understand what is best approach to actively protect and increase the city's tree canopy. So today I want us to get a baseline understanding of our current policies and initiatives specific to the tree canopy and what the data says about them and begin to discuss where we go from there. So with that, I'll hand it over to our city team. Mr. Porter.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmera. Good morning, everyone. Really excited about the opportunity to speak to the Triple E Committee today, and let's jump right in. One second as we go to the next slide here. So as Ms. Ajmera mentioned, we are going to be looking at the referrals from the budget development process to this committee regarding tree canopy. Today, especially focus on current policies and initiatives in place that support preservation, sustainable efforts to grow Charlotte's tree canopy. We'll do a state of the canopy review, also discuss a little bit about the framework and in place to manage those efforts, and hopefully set a groundwork for future discussion on best practices and recommendations for the future of our tree canopy. Briefly, the outline will go like this. We'll review the committee charge. It's quite robust, and again, we'll focus on the first item in that charge, highlight some key milestones over the past few decades, briefly touch on the internal framework the city has, and then really dig into policies and initiatives and the state of our canopy, and then end with a summary on next steps. So as you can see, the committee charge referred to Triple E during the budget process is quite robust, and underlined is the first item that we're going to spend the most time on today. I'm not going to read through this slide for everyone, but we'll be visiting all of these items, likely throughout a series of meetings, 2, possibly 3, based on Ms. Ajmera and committee members' preference and how to move forward on this. But real quick, let's take a quick step back and look at the overall reason why we're doing any of this. Charlotte's tree canopy is a significant quality of life machine. It provides so many benefits to the community. Trees are good, and this is a data-driven a slide that tells you exactly in some key areas what Charlotte's tree canopy does for residents. This data was obtained through the Tree Canopy Action Plan process, which was a companion project to the comprehensive plan. And this is an annual value, dollar amount, and unit value, a quick high-level view of what the canopy does for the community. So it's It's a very important natural resource. A lot going on this slide. This is a brief timeline of the last 14 years or so of some major tree canopy policy, program, initiatives, and events. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to right about 2019, in between 18 and 19. A lot was happening before that, but when we talk more about where are we now and key foundational elements, I'm probably going to touch on where we are now with recent big steps and how they compare to really the last crossroads moment that we had for tree canopy, which was about 2010 to 2012. You can see back in 2010 and 11, there was an amendment to the tree ordinance, council adopted canopy goal, Tree Charlotte was founded, and it's a similar time right now. It's a major crossroads moment for tree canopy, and major policy and program efforts are moving forward over the course of this 3-year period we're in. So internally, there's been a shift with the internal framework. We have 2 departments leading the way, planning, design, and development, and general services, managing 3 high-level focus areas of canopy policy, canopy programs, and tree maintenance. There's a new division being established this fiscal year in planning, the Community Tree Canopy Preservation Division. I'll be leading that, and that team right now has an urban forestry plan review and inspection team looking at land development permitting. We'll expand a little bit to take on some new programs that are shifting from general services. The city arborist and the landscape management group over in general services will work together and collaborate and co-lead all of the city's tree canopy efforts in those 3 focus areas. So focus area 1 is tree canopy policy, and we have a rich history. The community council have always placed large value in this area. In 2011, the 50 by 50 tree canopy goal was adopted, and that's still the current tree canopy goal. That, along with the urban forest master plan, which was adopted in 2017, serve as the real key foundational elements for all of our tree canopy efforts from about 2011 till the last year or so. Those are the key foundation. And moving forward, there's been efforts such as the Tree Canopy Action Plan to really help us in this crossroads moment determine the path forward for our efforts, for our goals. And that will help build on past efforts and the future efforts in the policy area listed on this slide. The 2040 Comprehensive Plan, of course, was recently adopted by City Council. And specifically in goal number 7, natural and built environment, there is a host of robust and numerous tree canopy policy objectives, program recommendations, regulatory recommendations, and many, many other efforts recommended in that adopted plan. 2 parts of the new foundation for all canopy efforts based on the comprehensive plan will be new tree canopy regulations in the Unified Development Ordinance and amendments to the tree ordinance. Another key policy area is the enforcement and implementation of those regulations through land development permitting. So as we just take a quick accounting of all the efforts going on right now, I wanted to mention that as we all know, there's been a very significant boom in all development and market areas for many years now, and staff in the Charlotte Development Center ensure that tree canopy is planted and preserved as needed. Additionally, there is permitting and regulatory enforcement roles provided by the city arborist. Ms. Lori Reed is here, and her team ensure there's protection and planting of city trees outside of the land development process. So shifting into the second focus area of programs, highlighting a few of the key programs that look to plant and preserve trees in the city in multiple different ways. We have the Tree Canopy Preservation Program and it's Urban Arboretum Trail Initiative. It's all part of one umbrella program. That program acquires land through developer paid fees collected during land development permitting and seeks to acquire land and preserve it long-term for tree canopy preservation. Of course, there's a long-standing partnership with Tree Charlotte. The city served as an incubation and growth foundation for that entity, and we have collaborated for many years now to help educate, increase awareness, and of course plant trees, particularly on private property in areas where the city may not be naturally just as agile to plant trees on. A new program we want to highlight is the Tree by Tree initiative led by the city arborist and landscape management. It's a new program to engage residents to track their private trees in an online map interface. It's really, really user-friendly. It's pretty cool. There's a high cool factor associated with that, so I think that'll be a really great hit with the community to help them become aware and increase awareness on canopy preservation, protection, and maintenance needed. Additional program areas we're looking to grow that are supported by the comprehensive plan. Future opportunities to really engage and check some boxes for tree canopy care, sustainability, planting, and preservation is developing a robust canopy engagement and education program, and the canopy care program, which we intend to implement as an umbrella program for multiple efforts. The Staying in Place initiative may be an avenue where some of the canopy care program elements are implemented. A large tree assistance program, as council may recall, in 2017 and 18, there was a pilot project to help residents in the Wesley Heights neighborhood manage and take care of large hazardous trees on their property. Planting and a grant program are other elements intended to be within that program. And I want to note that canopy care, right now we're exploring through the UDO, possible funding source through heritage tree mitigation fees collected during permitting for the removal of heritage trees. So shifting into extremely important focus area is tree maintenance, and this is led by landscape management for street tree maintenance and planting. It's a very robust program that provides numerous services for the pruning, removal, and planting of trees. Also very important, storm response, safely clearing roads to ensure that residents can move about the city. It's a very significant, important effort that is critical certainly during the summer months. And I would say, I'm looking over to Lori, probably March through November. It's a very busy time depending on the weather patterns. So it's a critical service provided by the City Arborist Group. Tree planting also provided by the City Arborist Group and other groups within the Landscape Management Division and General Services. CIP planting is implemented through the capital projects efforts the city puts forward. Okay, that was a quick, brief review of where we were, where are we now, and let's internally in programs provided by the city, and let's look at where we are now as far as the overall canopy on a very high level. And this is information we provided to council through the Tree Canopy Action Plan and UDO process. It's important to note that Charlotte has a robust tree canopy still, but there is decline, and that can't be ignored. It's a significant decline of about 4% from 2012 to 2018. And that's in the neighborhood of about 8,000 net acres of tree canopy loss. It occurred in all types, individual trees, small patches, and large-scale patches of 5 acres or greater. The most loss was seen in residential areas, which is not a surprise. That is the area we have the greatest canopy cover. But there was 1 or 2 surprises that we'll touch on in just a second here. And real quickly, the pink graphic on that map indicates canopy that did not change. It's very hard to see the loss and the gains. So the pink indicates that first bullet, we still do have a very robust canopy. But again, in this crossroads moment, it's likely time to look at where are we now and where we want to go, and then look at making some tough decisions on how to move forward. Real briefly, you can see that these are neighborhood profile areas seen in our Quality of Life Explorer map, there was loss all over the city. There's a few key areas of canopy gain, but they can be explained in part by forestry operations where trees are being grown intentionally for timber management. And they also were areas of, at the time, this is a snapshot of 12 to 18 of canopy loss. At the time, there was not significant growth in single-family development or commercial development, multifamily in those areas. So it's a widespread citywide trend of canopy loss. No surprise was the greatest loss was seen in single-family areas. Those areas are the greatest sink and source of our tree canopy. What was surprising is that within that focus area of single-family residential, the greatest canopy loss was seen on an incremental level, lot by lot. It wasn't clear cutting of massive new subdivisions, which of course led to some canopy loss, but the greatest loss was seen in established neighborhoods that experienced significant residential infill development, building permits, city tree work orders managed by the city arborist office, which does include storm damage response, but also tree removal efforts, just standard tree removal efforts. So this is an area that was eye-opening and surprising for us and has been a foundation to support new policy recommendations in the comprehensive plan and regulatory concepts proposed in the Unified Development Ordinance. Something else we wanted to touch on today is during the Tree Canopy Action Plan stakeholder process, which again was part of the comprehensive plan effort, there was a focused stakeholder group just for TCAP, and this was a basic poll, and so there was interest in looking at where are we now with 50 by 50, the current canopy goal, and perhaps considering adding to that, moving off of it. So it's just another way to look at where we are now and thoughts on possibly making some changes to the way we move forward on tree canopy efforts. 50 by 50 is a canopy goal. There only has one metric, and I think it's important to consider equity, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, of how that canopy is spread throughout the city, who has access to the benefits, water quality, air quality, temperatures, higher temperatures in areas of lower canopy. That goes hand in hand, but also knowing that there are some redline areas that have significantly lower canopy covers. Those are things that the current goal doesn't really address in any way. So on a very high level, briefly touched on one of the major problems is declining tree canopy, and we saw some of the high level things that canopy does, improving air quality, stormwater management, carbon sequestration. These are policy efforts that go directly to help stop that trend, to turn it around, and start looking at how to be equitable with the distribution of tree canopy and the benefits tree canopy provides. You can see there's, in the middle of that list, there's a number of policy initiatives with the word updated in front of it. Staff is suggesting, as a crossroads moment, rebuilding a new foundation for the future of tree canopy, considering adding to the new comprehensive plan, to the UDO as foundational elements, updated efforts in those three areas of looking at updating the canopy goal, updating the urban forest master plan, and connecting that to the comprehensive plan in a strategic, intentional way. But all that is based on a strong need to know where we are now. It's 2022, of course. We're 4 years out of the last major analysis work, and it's important to get a better grasp on what happened during those 4 years to come back and determine, do we need to adjust path or not? So these are policy areas that will directly help stall or change our tree canopy declining trends and make sure tree canopy provides benefits across the city in an equitable way. In the program focus area, these are programs that are supported by the Urban Forest Master Plan and the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Again, the ones with asterisks are future opportunities to really expand and complete some recommended efforts in the 2040 plan. These will directly help target intentional efforts to stop the declining tree canopy across Charlotte. And as I mentioned, the equitable distribution of those benefits, these are programs that will help directly target that issue. In just a moment, we'll touch on path forward and really we'd like to see, of course, what this committee and council thinks and where they want us to go with policy and program efforts in an intentional way. So in summary, I know it was very quick and there was a lot of information. We touched on current policies and initiatives in place. The milestones that have led us here, the work that's been done in the past and that's ongoing right now, and a brief status report of the state of our current canopy, which is declining, still robust, but declining. And next steps is to review the remaining charge items referred to this committee during the budget process. Review in a little more detail policy and program and regulatory and other strategic objectives adopted for tree canopy policy and program efforts in the 2040 comprehensive plan, and underline two key areas which really serve as action items to obtain feedback from this committee and council on what other areas may need to be identified and prioritized and studied in the future in the plan to work that we are suggesting the city take on, that last bullet of updating the tree canopy goal, the urban forest master plan, and conduct a new tree canopy analysis to get a better grasp on where are we now with canopy coverage, and is that trend of decline continuing? There may be opportunities to explore scalable, neighborhood scale, regional, and citywide canopy issues in that analysis. And with that, I will stop and
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Porter, on walking us through where we stand today with our policy, our programs. It's very concerning, and I know you had stated in your one of the slides that the problem we have is declining tree canopy. And I know that's what draws a lot of people to Charlotte is our beautiful tree canopy in an urban setting. What is concerning is we continue to lose about 3 football fields of tree canopy every single day. And that's what we have seen between 2012 and 2018, according to the tree canopy measurement. So I would like to hear from my committee members and colleagues here as to what are their thoughts. For me, what I would like to see is, here is our current canopy, which is at 45%. Is that correct, Tim?
that's correct, Ms. Edgemere.
Yeah, and what I would like to see under our UDO, if adopted, what would tree canopy look like 5 years down the road? Using some sort of forecast, I would be interested in seeing what it would look like. And let's say if the UDO doesn't get adopted, what under current, without UDO, what would it look like? So that we really have apple-to-apple comparison in terms of our tree canopy policy in the UDO. With that, I would like to see, I see Ms. Johnson's hand is up. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for such an important presentation. My questions are, Ms. Edgemere just mentioned that the current tree canopy is 45%. Are those 2018 numbers?
That's correct. The aerial imagery and data available for that, the most recent assessment was 2012 and 2018, a change comparison. There is updated available data for 2020 and possibly 2022, but what we're talking about today is based on 2018 data.
So my thought is if we're developing a future plan, we should at least be looking at current data. Between 2018 and 2022, that's 4 years. So Ms. Ashmira, when you ask for a 5-year outlook, we're already 4 years into that. And we also have to take into consideration this city has undergone explosive growth. So any normal trend is not even going to be realistic. So I think before we can develop a plan for the future, we need to be looking at realistic numbers. I mean, since 2018, so I guess the question would be, since 2018 and 2022, what's been the percentage of growth in zoning? I mean, I'm sure it's different than from 2012 to 2018. So I think that it doesn't feel like these numbers are realistic based on the explosive growth that we all know that we're undergoing. So I'd like to see a realistic report before we can know how we're going to proceed. I'd also like that report to be broken down by district. If we look at our zonings, we know that certain areas are really growing based on the cost of land. So districts 2, 3, and 4, I imagine has lost more tree canopy than other areas. I don't know, but I would like to see the breakdown by district when we're talking about being intentional and looking at equitable approaches. I also have a question, and I've asked this before. What's happening to the wildlife that's being displaced by all of this when we're tearing down these forests? Is there a mitigation plan for the wildlife that's being displaced? I mean, I've seen 2 dead deers just on W.T. Harris alone. You know, that's a 55, 60 mile per hour street, and it's dangerous. So I want to know if that's being addressed anywhere in the city. And also, how are we doing? How is the city of Charlotte doing compared to other cities comparable to our size? So is there a organization that oversees tree canopy? How are we measuring up? Because again, we're going through extraordinary growth, and it seems like our issues are unique that need to be considered. So I'd like to know how we're measuring up, and how we should be doing as far as our tree canopy. And that's all the questions I have. But there's several important issues. But the first thing I think we need to do is take a look at current numbers. I think that's very important. And again, from 2018 to 2022, it's not going to be the normal trend based on the extraordinary factors. So I think that's very, very important. Ms. Ashmira and Mr. Winston, when we're looking at the UDO, we do need to be comparing apples to apples. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Porter?
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson, for those comments and questions. And I agree, to really have a great foundation for future policy is to know where are we right now. And part of the 3 initiative project that we're suggesting to council to take place after the UDO initiative, and that last bullet on the slide in the current screen, there's 3 items: tree canopy goal, urban forest master plan, and tree canopy analysis. And that's that analysis that I think you were talking about, Ms. Johnson, is to really get an assessment of where are we now. You're absolutely right. It's been 4 years of unprecedented growth. And we can study things in that analysis, such as wildlife impacts, canopy loss, regionally by council areas, but also neighborhood scale, and also dig into things we don't have a granular understanding on, such as infill development. We know it's a cause of canopy decline, but we don't know to a really high level of certainty compared with storm damage in established neighborhoods. What's driving that trend more? There is a really interesting reality we're in now with data and technology for canopy assessment. There's actually a tool available now that has a continual real-time update for canopy trends. There's one or more vendors out there that have an artificial intelligence-driven product that can essentially analyze your tree canopy data in real time. Not real time depends on when the new data is available, but that could be monthly, it could be annually. And that's something we explored last fall, and it's something I'd love to talk to this group more about, is having a better grasp routinely on a monthly or an annual process of where we're now with canopy that would support more agile policy and program efforts.
Thank you for that. Another thing that we can do is in our zonings every month, when we're looking at does this zoning meet our 10 goals for the 2040 plan, if we could have something from the arborist right up front, letting us know how this zoning is going to impact the environment or recommendations. Because I'm so happy that we're having this presentation. This is such an important issue. So I just like to keep this on the forefront for council, because even in the tree plan, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, our goal is when we tear down heritage trees that the developers replace them with new trees. Is that correct? We're counting new trees as a part of the tree canopy?
Currently, we have a heritage tree regulation that only requires the preservation of massive state champion type trees only in single family subdivisions. So right now, that's the only heritage tree regulation we have, and we average less than one tree preserved per year. In the UDO, we are proposing a heritage tree regulation for both development and non-development scenarios that would require significant mitigation measures be taken for any removed heritage tree. Replanting at least one tree replanted for each heritage tree removed, along with mitigation fees that would support the canopy care program. And one of the efforts of that program would be community-driven replanting on private property in neighborhoods.
Well, thank you. Well, again, I think it's important that council look at current numbers before we can make any decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I agree with you in terms of looking at our current data. And I see the timeline here, but that doesn't really align with our UDO timeline. And UDO is so important from the policy perspective for our tree ordinance. So are we ultimately saying that we are going to adopt the UDO and then going to continue to work on our tree canopy goal? Is that correct?
This timeline would support that approach, and we would envision within 18 months to 24 months after we have completed that analysis work and updated canopy goal and master plan work to revisit with this committee and council to amend and change any regulatory requirements or policy and program objectives in the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and I guess this is where I am puzzled. We are already going through this tree canopy policy review exercise. Why don't we align our timeline with our UDO adoption so that we can incorporate the recommendations from the council in our UDO versus waiting for another 2 years to include it in our UDO? I mean, that's one of the concerns that I have. I think we have a UDO currently scheduled for end of August, and I would like to see some of our recommendation being included in that versus waiting for another review. And I see Mr. Winston's hand is up. Mr. Winston?
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the tree canopy action plan, because, as Ms. Edgemere said, I asked, I really wanted to talk about this in committee. because I think there's kind of two approaches that we council, needs to consider. We have the big kind of macro approach where we set our regulations. Our regulations which should be found in the UDO, and we set our policy objectives, which are kind of translated in the comprehensive plan. But I also want us to focus on like the micro. What can we as the city do on our own kind of property? A city with a big C. I realize that we actually have a lot of property. We have a lot of infrastructure in neighborhoods. And I'm wondering if we are asking ourselves, are we doing all that we can do to provide canopy and trees on our property? So I think about infrastructure like police stations and fire stations, greenways, and places our investments are in. Have we asked ourselves, or have we taken a look at, fire stations are going to be in our neighborhood, right, when we build them for 50 years? Are we maximizing in our designs all of the trees that we can put on our own properties? Do we have any type of action plan for that?
There is a strategic partnership and recommended project objective in the comprehensive plan to look at city-owned properties. And I welcome any feedback from my general services colleagues to touch on any actual program in place now. General Services definitely plants a lot of trees on city properties, and through the TCPP program, we replant any trees needed to ensure that those properties are 100% canopy, or as much canopy as possible. I'm not sure.
Well,
Hey, Tim. Yes, this might be a good place for me to share a bit of good news. With around our General Services Landscape Management Division. Again, I'm David Wolf, Deputy Director with General Services. And we have a goal for every tree we remove to replace. So because of decay and other hazards, age, we had to remove around 628 street trees last year. We replaced those with 822 trees. So every year we meet our goal of having a 1-for-1 minimum replacement. But that doesn't include, we can add 1,400 more trees to that number through new capital projects, through our efforts at our cemeteries. We now have a cemetery who has reached Arboretum status, through our planning at TCPP properties. And yes, looking, as you speak to, looking at city properties where we can plant trees. We grew our canopy last year by a total of about 1,400 trees. So a bit of good news, and yes, staff has been for a number of years focused at looking at city properties and where we can plant. And I'll just throw in that we also work with Trees Charlotte in that respect at schools and other county properties.
that's great. I think I would suggest, Ms. Ashmere, you talked about things that can be done now. If we're asking ourselves, are we doing all that we can do on our own property? Because it sounds like we're doing good things. But if there's the ability for us to put to use what's in our immediate domain, if we're maximized there, that could be a pathway. Because again, when we think about the macro and we set the policy recommendations or kind of regulations for the city, that's a good thing. But we're still waiting on other people to do something. So maybe we can. I would love for staff as they're thinking about further recommendations to think there. I do think there's more that we can think about on the macro level, though. I agree with Ms. Johnson. If we can find a way to objectively score our zoning decisions, kind of going forward, I know we're starting to do that. With the kind of the goal scoring with the comp plan. But I think if staff really finds a good way to objectively score zoning to zoning, that could be an effective tool for future councils. But I also think we need to look at things, again, from what we can do for things like street design. Our infrastructure investments, we know, are going to be huge over the coming generation. And I know historically, streets have had a relationship with trees, and trees are often removed in street designs because there was a certain philosophy that roads are supposed to go fast and everywhere, and the removal of trees can make roads be designed to slow traffic down. Now, we know that we're trying to deal with things like pedestrian safety. Maybe we should be asking ourselves, are there things that we can do with our road design to cut down less trees and all of our infrastructure to cut down less trees when it comes to that? Are we looking at trees and street design? Looking if there's any way we can change the way we approach that?
Thank you, Mr. Winston. I can add to that. And through the capital projects process, there is a significant effort to plant as many trees as possible within the scope of each project. Something else that we have started recently internally is discussions with, as I look down the table to Mr. Wolf and the city arborist, internally creating a strategic, intentional, no net loss mandate for all city work. So any trees removed, as David mentioned, any trees removed by the city in general services, there's a goal to replant that, and actually they have a net gain in overall. We're looking to extend that citywide to projects and maintenance. It may take some time to develop that, but that's something we want to your point of making sure we're doing everything we can do. We want to be a net generator of tree canopy. At the very worst, we don't want to be a cause of net loss. So we're looking to implement a citywide no net loss effort to ensure that we are preserving and planting as many trees as we can to offset any removal caused by capital projects, maintenance, or other projects.
And this is one note, I've been taking notes here on this conversation, and to your point, Councilmember Winston, what's within our purview as Big C, City of Charlotte, this could be something that staff could take your questions, your insights, and we could put together some information and also kind of take a closer look at a future meeting if that's something that this committee would be interested in, because I think that there's probably a lot that we could really dig into here at a good time.
I would like that, and just one more comment from the response that I just got. I know that we try to maximize trees under like current regulations, but again, like I said, specifically when we think of street design, right, over a generation or two, we've thought about the relationship between trees and roads in particular in a certain way. So the kind of status quo, again, perhaps maybe is not as intensely, maybe we are unable to preserve trees, even if we, try to match one-to-one, then if we were able to take a different kind of approach to street design. I don't know if I'm totally communicating that right, but, maybe there's certain ways that we've been building roads and infrastructure that is less compatible to new ideas between the relationship between trees and building roads. And I'd love to explore that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. I agree with Mr. Winston on reviewing our street design document and how do we include our tree canopy goals. Mr. Winston is absolutely right. We need to find creative ways to include our tree canopy in our infrastructure. Is that correct? Yeah. So, Ms. Hazel, if you could add that to our next meeting agenda, And I think you heard loud and clear from my colleagues on this committee that the passion that we all have for preserving and protecting our tree canopy, but also growing our tree canopy. And we must solve this issue, and failure to do so endangers our city's health and our long-term quality of life. And with that, Mr. Winston said one more thing, that we got to do everything that we can. So I would like us to amend our timeline to align with the UDO timeline to review our future goals and recommendations to be incorporated into our UDO. All right, I guess that's all we have on our UDO, on our tree canopy. The next topic.
Ms. Ashmira, can I just say one more?
Yes, Ms. Johnson. Sorry, I see your hand.
Okay, thank you. It's just to piggyback off what Mr. Winston said when you talk about creative goals. If we're looking at our other policies, such as like the required parking or something like that, like maybe that's an area that we could look at. So I think that's what we're saying, to look at all of our policies and how, again, how we can improve policies to consider the tree canopy. But I just want to reiterate, we need current numbers. We're looking at 2018 numbers. It's like trying to solve a problem for another city. We're not the same city that we were in 2018, so I don't feel like we can move forward realistically and effectively if we're not looking at current numbers. I feel like we're in a more critical state based on the explosive growth. So just for my colleagues, I think we really need to push that we need current numbers. We're not being realistic and we're not being effective by looking at the city in 2018 with 2018 numbers. Thank you.
So, Mr. Porter, to Ms. Johnson's question, how soon we can get the current data on our tree canopy?
Traditionally, a tree canopy analysis for a city-wide approach really relies on what's available. What I mean by that is typically the federal government of the state of North Carolina will conduct a regional flyover where an airplane or a satellite assesses not just canopy data, but aerial imagery, including LIDAR, which is laser determining elevations of objects. Historically, canopy analysis projects were almost completely dependent on the timing of that data being available. So I will have to check and see what is available and bring that information back to the committee. If the data is available, the state and U.S. government provide that data free of charge. If it's not, then we'd have to look at flying the entire city. If that's the case, it would likely take 6 months to a year to fly the entire city, collect the data, work with a consultant to boil it down to something we can analyze. If the data is available right now, it would likely take 3 to 6 months to work with a consultant to determine, and this committee, of course, and council determine scope and move forward on that.
And if I could add to that, this is Allison Craig, Planning. The reason for the timeline is that we passed the comprehensive plan June 21st of 2021 to look at all the different city priorities together. And the UDO is the regulatory tool then to help implement that comprehensive vision. As Tim is saying, it's going to take a little while to get the tree canopy analysis work done. And we believe that there are much stronger provisions in the UDO as proposed that will help our tree canopy. And so by delaying that, we would not be able to put those things in place. We do recognize that there will be, the UDO will continue to be updated. We'll have a series of text amendments. And so after we do this targeted work, analyzing where we are today and updating the urban forest master plan, then we can go back and make changes then to the UDO to implement some of those ideas that may come from that work.
I understand. Thank you, Ms. Craig. This work, data analysis work, could take easily 3 to 6 months, which could prevent us from regulating stricter requirements that we currently have on our tree canopy, especially with our UDO. So in that case, could we at least look at what would tree canopy look like under the UDO? And at least look at tree canopy, tree canopy from our infrastructure perspective that Mr. Winston was alluding to earlier, specifically like street design. Can we look at that? I would be very interested in seeing what would future tree canopy look like under the UDO. We don't have any data on that.
And I think it would be challenging just because we don't have current data to be able to do that from a quantitative standpoint, but I do think from a qualitative standpoint, we could do a comparison, what we have in place today and what the stronger measures would be as proposed in the UDO. We could provide that.
Yes, and if you could also provide all the updates that have been, or current versus future in terms of tree canopy open space and what it looks like in the UDO, so that council committee gets a better picture on this is what we are proposing under the UDO to protect our tree canopy.
Sure, we can provide that.
Okay, so Ms. Hazel, time is of the essence here. We have a very strict timeline with our UDO, and we got to make sure that committee has all the information prior to that adoption timeframe.
Councilmember Ajmira, maybe I would suggest that some of these follow-up items we do quickly, more not waiting for a month to go by until we have the next EEE committee, and we get some of that information to council as soon as possible.
Perfect. Yes, that would be great. And then after looking at our current versus what would a UDO state, council committee might have recommendations. And I want us to be mindful of those recommendations that might get incorporated or would like to be incorporated into our UDO. So I would like to see our next meeting where we at least have some time between the UDO adoption timeframe and the committee, where some of the recommendations could be brought forward to the full council.
Councilmember Ajmira, we can put together some information and then look at what's the right options to communicate this as quickly as possible back to this committee and also make sure full council receives the same information.
Okay. Thank you so much. All right, so that's all we have on our tree canopy. The second topic we have here is our equity and governance policy.
Yes, good morning again, Councilmember Ajmira, Johnson, and Winston. I will offer up an expeditious review, just quickly sharing what we've done to date since you all last saw the your equity and governance framework. We shared that we would be committing to this engagement strategy, and so I'm excited to share that we've met with 3 of the 5 initial boards and commissions of the City of Charlotte to talk to them in reference to the equity and governance framework and get some initial feedback. I will be going before the 2 other groups, the Community Relations Committee and the Charlotte International Cabinet, this week. After we're done with those groups this week, I will then shift to meeting with community-based organizations and seeking their input. I will ask again if there are members of this committee that feel strongly about particular community-based organizations that you would like me to reach out to. Please let me know those particular organizations and any contact you may have that I can reach out to them and have that discussion. A couple of the things that we've heard so far or learned through this process, we've heard over and over that we're on the right path. There was a great deal of gratitude from the groups that we've met with that this committee and by extension council has committed towards really prioritizing equity in its work. We've heard to be very targeted with our engagement. So there was, again, an appreciation around seeking input from boards and commissions, knowing that that is their focus as you all's representatives in particular areas, and then really shifting to that community-based piece. This was really interesting, and we specifically heard this last week from CBI's advisory committee. There was a desire for them to use the equity and governance framework in their work as they bring proposals to you all as council members. And so exciting to hear from that perspective from one of our boards and commissions that this could be a tool that they could implement within the body of their work. There was also a desire to focus on that accountability and the framework really moving forward, that they would like to see it in all decisions being made at you all's level, at the council level, but also at the staff level. So they really appreciated that that was central to the work, and we're excited to see how that would play out. There was also a desire to not just apply the equity and governance framework to policies moving forward, but also policies that are currently in place. And so that also is exciting to me as your equity officer with the City of Charlotte, that this is bubbling up for community members, that we can really utilize this as a tool to sift through policies that already exist. That's it for me. I don't know if there's anything else you all would like to chime in on in regards to this, but we're excited about the path that we've taken so far.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rios. I will send you I'll send you one recommendation to reach out to regarding our equity and governance policy and gather feedback.
Excellent. Thank you, Thank you, Councilmember Edgemere.
So currently, Mr. Rios, what is the timeline for adoption of this framework?
As of now, we propose to present this at the August 22nd council meeting.
Okay, so that means this will be adopted by the future council if the presentation is scheduled for 22nd. Is that correct?
Councilmember Jamir, I think it could be one of two ways, but given that the existing council did see the draft framework that you all approved, it could be, August 22nd could be the final time it comes before council, or if it's the will of council to spend more time on it, it would then be a future council, given the time frame that we're in right now. But our initial plan was to have it wrapped up in August.
Right. So I guess I know you have, Frederico, you have had multiple small group sessions with our colleagues to get them up to speed on what this committee is working on from equity policy. What has been feedback, and do you see that they have additional questions where you see further delay in pushing this to the next council?
There were some additional questions about the application of it, specifically on how we would go to our next step, which was utilizing measures related to equity. So the use of equity measures is something that will take a greater deal of time. There was also, we heard it both ways. We heard it may be best to move forward August 22nd, recognizing that this committee has worked diligently on this framework and the desire to move that forward quickly. And then we've also heard that it would be beneficial to do it with new council. So there's no set consensus, but I think we respect the desire of this committee and would move forward either way, either presenting and that being the last time we present, or incorporating it again with future council.
Got it. I just think if we are going to do a presentation on the 22nd and have an adoption right afterwards, wouldn't give community to provide their feedback on the same day. But I would leave it up to the council to decide, majority of the council to decide how they want to move forward. But then also keep in mind, this is just the framework. I mean, I see this as a resolution that City Council had adopted on carbon neutral goal back in 2018, and then we followed that with Strategic Energy Action Plan. So I see this as sort of a framework, and then we will have an action plan with detailed measuring of how we are doing our how we are doing on our policy. So I think the message there needs to be that this is continuing work. This is just the framework, and additional performance and how we measure equity will be followed after the framework has been adopted. And I wanted to hear what my colleagues have to say on the timeline for this equity and governance framework. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I agree with you as far as the time frame. If we wanted to present it on the 22nd and also adopt it because it is the foundational work, my question is if this needs to go for public hearing. If it needs to go for public hearing, then I think the presentation should be after September to the next council, then allow the time for public hearing, then adoption. And it gives the new council time to hear the presentation, to learn more about it, because it is a future goal. So we know that it's great work and it's important, and it's setting up for the next council and for future goals. It's just a matter of, does this need to go before the public? If it does, I would say that it just be presented after the new council is sworn in. Thank you.
I think the prerogative of the council, would be the prerogative of the council. I think this is an internal policy, so this is really about governance. I think it'll be up to our colleagues, do they think it needs more work or more public scrutiny? I think I'm proud of the work that staff has done. And I think we really got into some of the nuances of, in this committee. So again, I like the work, but I'm going to leave it up to the prerogative of the full council to decide whether the 22nd is the right time to present and adopt, or if it needs a different timeline.
Thank you, Mr. Winston, and thank you, Ms. Johnson. So, Mr. Rios, I think you hear consensus among the committee members is for the full council to decide on the timeline. But we'll be ready for your presentation on the 22nd. So we got to give council the two options. One is to adopt the framework on the same day. Our second option is to defer it to the next council. So I just want us to be mindful that if council decides to say we are ready to move forward with this action, then let's get this language ready for the adoption on the 22nd.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is that all you have on equity and governance framework? I know the committee has done a lot of work on this already, so I just want us to be mindful of time here. We got another important piece, which is the engagement tools, and I just want to make sure that we leave last 25 minutes for that topic.
Yes, that's it for me.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Rios. Ms. Johnson, I'm going to have to step out for a few minutes. Could you please lead this meeting, Madam Vice Chair?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll turn it over to city staff for the final presentation. Thank you.
And I'm just going to hand it over to Rebecca Hefner, who you probably know, but just to reiterate, is a core part of the EEE staff team, who's been doing mostly behind the scenes work, helping to move forward a lot of the work that you have focused on over the past several months, but she'll be presenting the next item for you. So I'll hand it over to Rebecca now.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, committee members. We'll be talking today about community engagement guiding principles. And in the spirit of most of my work being behind the scenes, I'm presenting to you today on work that has been developed and worked on for several years by two people who couldn't be here. So I want to shout out to them, Nicole Story, who is the manager of our Community Engagement Division in Housing and Neighborhood Services, and Tracy Etheridge, who works in Community Relations Committee. So we're on our third E here, engagement, and you've got your third string quarterback presenting, but I'm excited to be here, and I think that you will be interested to hear about some of the work, and we're hopeful that you can help us shape how we move this going forward. The main focus of today's presentation is to share with you all the guiding principles that we have developed as staff to how we approach community engagement across the organization and within the community. In order to get there, I'll share a little bit about the work that we have done to develop community engagement values, some of the recent efforts that we have embarked upon related to community engagement, a lot of lessons that we're learning, and then we'll go through the guiding principles, followed by discussion and gaining some feedback from you all on specifically related to what are your expectations as council for how we engage the community, what is your role as council in community engagement, and to gain some feedback on the guiding principles themselves. So community engagement is something that we do all the time, every day, whether it's planned and intentional or not. And so I'll just share some of the work that has gotten us to a place where we are being more intentional and strategic across the city. We have a community engagement community of practice at the city. This is a voluntary collaboration of community engagement staff, public information staff, and other interested staff across the city who have been getting together regularly for several years to really look at best practices and tools and collaborating across the city. In 2020, that community engagement community of practice worked with Johns Hopkins University's GovX Academy to begin work on what a community engagement toolkit could look like for the city of Charlotte. So that's work that is in development currently. What we call the Toolkit 1.0 is nearly ready for sharing. But that's really going to be a framework for how and why we engage with community, what some best practices are, what are the various tools available, resources, and key contacts. We did work with GovX at that time on identifying a set of core values. And from that facilitation, we identified these core values as people-centered, meaningfully inclusive, relationship-driven, accountable, and facilitative. And you will see those core values show up both in some of the examples of community engagement that I'll share, but also in the guiding principles that this team has developed since that time. Community engagement is really a practice. It's a practice that takes many, many forms across the city. So what you can see on this slide is a long list of, long but not exhaustive by any means, list of some of the many ways that the community engages with the city in our various projects, initiatives, and daily work. How we show up in all of these settings really impacts our relationships with community as a whole, our relationships with individuals, and the level of trust that is built between city staff and community members. And so what we want to do is really show up in a way that is strategic, that's intentional, that's collaborative, and is really specifically tailored to be equitable and inclusive. So we need to think in all of these different settings, how are we making sure that we are reaching those for whom English is a second language, seniors, youth, persons with disability, and people who are housing insecure, people who have less comfort level with technology. There's a whole range of experiences for folks in the community that we need to consider as we look at any given engagement experience. A really important part of how we are guided for community engagement at the city is the public participation spectrum. So this is a spectrum developed by the International Association of Public Participation, and it's used in cities across the world. And it's really a framework that defines the intention of community engagement and public participation. And that ranges from public information, which you can see on the left of this chart, all the way to the public having final decision-making authority. And so the words on this slide are a little bit small, so we will make sure that this is sent out in a larger format. But the idea here is that the spectrum defines both the goal of public participation, which you can see in that top row, and what is our promise to the public. So as an example, on the right there in the middle on the involve part of the spectrum, the goal is around working directly with the public to ensure that public concerns and aspirations are consistently understood and considered. And then the promise to the public, like what will we do with what we learn through engagement, is that ensure the concerns and aspirations are directly reflected in the alternatives developed, and provide feedback on how public input influenced the decision. And I think that's one of the most important pieces, is that the feedback loop to help people who participated understand and see how their input influenced the decision. Last thing to note, and when we're thinking through designing an engagement strategy for any given project or initiative, the level and depth of participation from folks in the community will vary. We have residents who almost always engage, who frequently engage, who sometimes engage. We have some residents that we've never engaged with, or those who really rarely engage with us. And so it is our goal on any given program and initiative to both, to create a strategy that really creates opportunities for those who already are engaged to share, their feedback and participation, but also a tailored way to communicate to the populations of folks who would not necessarily engage, to make sure that we're growing the number of folks who want to engage with the city and who trust the process, feel heard, and know what their opportunities are to participate. Next, I'm going to share just a couple of recent examples of community engagement work. These are not perfect examples. We know we will never get it completely right. No engagement strategy will ever be. We're always learning, we're always evolving, we're always improving. But the next three examples, we're going to share a little bit about the different creative and innovative ways that we've been able to design engagement strategies, especially during the constraints of the COVID pandemic. First, I just want to share a little bit about the engagement work that was done as part of the street renaming initiative that came out of the Legacy Commission. There were 9 streets renamed as part of this street renaming project, and those streets were really part of distinct communities. So 9 different, distinct, diverse areas where we needed to reach out to and really gain community feedback. So there were meetings and sessions about what we were doing and why we were doing it, but it was also a very concerted effort to get as many of the impacted residents and businesses to participate in voting on renaming the streets. So you can see on this slide all of the different activities that took place. The final tally was over 9,800 mailings, 86 yard signs, 3 ballot boxes, and over 430 addresses canvassed, meaning someone went to the door and spoke with a person about what was happening. The next example, share a little bit about the comp plan engagement. So the comp plan engagement had some particular challenges. One, the entire city is impacted by this work. And so the engagement strategy needed to be extraordinarily broad and also entirely inclusive. The second challenge that arose, of course, was doing this work in the middle of the pandemic. And so the team had to make a lot of changes to the strategy that they had laid out initially and start to do things in a hybrid and virtual environment. And some of their efforts were really innovative in terms of how they managed that, and including doing drive-ins. You can see the picture of the cars there when we were in the height of the pandemic and not gathering in person. But it is a particular challenge to share this much information and with every impacted resident. But the comp plan team did do a great job, especially at the beginning, of identifying who they wanted to reach, who some of the folks were who typically didn't have a voice in these types of processes, and then tailored the engagement and outreach locations and strategies to that purpose. The last example I'll share is our current Staying in Place initiative. And again, this is much smaller in scope and scale, which makes it a little bit easier to reach the people that you are trying to reach. But even so, what we learned in the Staying in Place engagement is that each neighborhood has its own needs and desires and best ways to reach them. So this is 3 neighborhoods: Winterfield, Washington Heights, and Hidden Valley. And the team went through a really interesting process where they went out and talked to the leaders in Winterfield and said, okay, how would you like to be engaged? They said, let's start with notifying everyone that you'll be out in the community with postcards. We went to Washington Heights and said, hey, we're going to send out postcards. And they said, no, let's do a pop-up event. And then we took that information to Hidden Valley, and they said, we want to do this work with block ambassadors. So it's really important that you listen to and can adjust your strategies with the community that you're engaging with. I think the other really important piece of Staying in Place, which is the last bullet here, is that we went out into the community engagement on this project saying, we haven't fully designed this program. And we want to hear from you about what you need here and how we can best work together to achieve it. And we committed to learn and iterate as we go. Now, this was sometimes uncomfortable for staff, and it can even be more frustrating for communities sometimes. But we're confident that we're getting a better outcome by going through that collaborative process. All right, lessons learned. We have 2 full slides of lessons learned, and clearly I don't have enough time to go through each and every one of them. So I want to touch on a few important pieces here, and then leave them for you to digest. A couple of important things that we're learning. There is really no one-size-fits-all solution. You can't have a step-by-step process that you follow that works every time. The planning for community engagement needs to consider what the initiative is, who will be impacted, what the goal of the engagement is along that IAP2 spectrum, and then the importance of really managing those expectations up front. So clearly communicate what are our goals with engagement? How are we doing with that? Who are we engaging to help us engage those neighborhood organizations and trusted leaders? And then, of course, we've learned that hybrid is the future. We have to be able to engage across multiple platforms at multiple times with lots of different people, although traditional in-person engagement remains a really essential part of our work. Second slide here, more learnings. We really want to be creative and collaborative. We have to be inclusive and mindful of what barriers might exist for folks to engage. I think something that's really critical that we do is when something goes wrong, we need to make it right. We're not always going to get this right the first time, and when we misstep, we need to be open to feedback from the community and to addressing that both in that current initiative and in the future. The other thing that we're really focused on is this defining and communicating expectations and really understanding the difference between quality and quantity as it relates to our goals. So when we are doing public information about something that's very broad, we may look for quantity. We want to make sure people hear the information. When we want collaborative co-designing of initiatives, like in staying in place, we're really looking for quality. We want to engage a smaller number of people, but to really deeply understand what their needs are. With that, takes us to our guiding principles. So we have 6 guiding principles. These are really a framework, but also a commitment for how we want to show up and engage with the community. Having a set of principles will allow us to be more consistent across the organization. So it will set the stage for how we plan and design community engagement. There'll be some consistency across no matter which department is doing the engagement work. And then and also set us up for greater success and broader and deeper levels of community engagement. So the principles here are that we want our community engagement to be inclusive, curious and collaborative, transparent and accountable, open and timely. We're going to focus on mutual trust and respect, and have engagement that is strategic and intentional. So I will let you digest the components of each of those guiding principles as we go forward. In the interest of time, I'm going to jump to key takeaways. No, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Define success in advance. Be really mindful of building relationships before we ask people for things or about things. We need to have a good, strong foundational relationship with folks. And then we believe these guiding principles will affirm alignment across the organization. Our next steps as it relates to the guiding principles is to release the community engagement toolkit. This is a 1.0, something that will be a work in progress. We will identify and incorporate the complementary policies and guidelines. So one of the things that we really want to do next is take a look at the equity and governance framework and see where those two pieces align in particular. And then we'll be looking at ways to apply the community engagement guiding principles across the organization. So I'm going to pause there for questions and feedback from the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Hefner. I'll ask Mr. Winston, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I think this is all great. So one of the things that, one of the areas I think we can really focus on when it comes to engagement is working with our partners, right? Working with our partners in the community. Government is, what we really are is a repository of information. We do so much work across so many different areas that But we again, everything that we do, we work from how can we partner with people in our community to do what we do better. While we should work on our own engagement strategies, I think we should recognize that we have partners in our community whose job it is, right? Whose expertise it is to engage different segments of our community and communicate information to them. That's particularly our constituents in the press and in media. And I think we can and we should ask ourselves some questions about how we interact with our constituents in the press and media. There are many different models that are employed in the press and media of communicating with various different demographics, right? We all probably consume information from different outlets, whether it be direct news or we just get information from different sources. Some of those might overlap, but we probably have a mix of where we all get information from. I know where I get information from is very different than where my 15-year-old son gets information from. But again, a lot of times it'll be sourced from people within our community. So while there are certainly certain members of the media and press who know our work closely and follow our work closely, I would bet that most of these of our constituents who work in media and press don't really understand what we have going on generally, or how the interests of work that we're doing directly focuses on some of the demographics of people within our community, how they relate to that work. So the question I would ask for staff and council to explore is, are we doing everything that we can do to equip and inform our constituents in the local media and press with information? And how can we do more? How can we work better with those folks? Because again, their job is to specifically communicate information to large sections of people. And I know I've heard that we can improve the process there from constituents in media and the press. So recognizing that their specialty is to communicate with large and specific communities within our larger at-large community, how do we better share the dynamic and fluid, complex information that we have with these constituents? So information can get out more nimbly in a way that is consumable for folks that follow them. And I would, again, tell us to think about not just, yes, we should think about our traditional news outlets, but again, understanding that there's, from a creative standpoint, there's so many different ways people consume information from outlets. So are we making sure that that information is transferable to those folks, again, in that kind of fluid fashion?
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Great feedback. We will, I think that would be a great piece of work to incorporate into 2.0, but also think about the press and the media as a specific constituent body to help us get information out. So thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I think they would appreciate that, and I think that could be helpful. And I think I would, of course, engage individuals, but there are groups of folks out there. I think for instance, the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative, I think the CJC, that's a place where that has many different forms of journalism and media that intersect in one place. Maybe there's ways that we can interact better with that portion of folks that could really be allies.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Ms. Hefner, can you go back in the presentation? There was a slide that had like stick figures or Yeah, thank you. Not exactly stick figures, but this one. I think this is such an important illustration. And I'll give you an example. I have a rezoning that was scheduled for tonight's decision, but we had to defer it because the neighbors that were closely impacted did not have the engagement. So I think if we're really intentional about ensuring that the public is aware, it just makes all of our processes more efficient. You mentioned the 2040 plan. We know that there was a minimal participation. So I would ask, I know the city has an app. Are we utilizing the city's app? Have we looked at improving like the information that's on the app for residents? One of the things I know that I would like to see is information about rezonings or information, just a very comprehensive or cumulative information page. I don't know if that would be some kind of newsletter to residents, or something where we're getting all of this information out. You all do great work, but if people aren't aware of it, then there's that disconnect. So I wonder, have you all thought about just really beefing up the app or doing some type of newsletter? I know there's a news outlet, QC Quickies, and I think they do a phenomenal job of summarizing the city council meetings and those issues. So I wondered if we thought about some type of application where there's this online newsletter where the residents can get all of the current information that's being discussed or that's upcoming.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I like that QC Quickie. I think the challenge is we are often as staff so deeply involved in the work that it's hard for us to pick out those small pieces of information. And one of the things that our Charlotte Communications and Marketing Group does so well. But again, figuring out what are all of the mechanisms to communicate that and the ways that people will receive it is part of the strategy. So I will make sure that the utilization of the city's app is on the list of things that we're taking a look at in terms of how we can better utilize our platforms for communication.
Even if we piloted it based on zonings, if we sent out something to the community regarding the zonings in their area, and again, we need to simplify things, not necessarily by zoning numbers. If the zoning number were there and maybe the street number or the street name or the intersection, and I know I'm getting into the weeds, but we just need to improve our communication to our constituents. And I know that each council member has a mailing list of their contacts in their areas. Maybe if that were combined, if it were if it was just more, I guess, simple to become a new community leader on that list. I think we should really utilize our app or that ability. Also, the government television station. I know that Allison and the planning staff, they start utilizing the government television stations to educate folks about the 2040 and the UDO, and I think that's a very effective tool as well. There are a lot of people that watch that channel, so I think we should really take a look at that as well. And then lastly, can you give me an update, if you have it, on ASL interpretation for council meetings? I know that this committee approved that and it went to the budget to be implemented. So do you have an update for that?
Vice Chair Johnson, this is Sarah Hazel. So it was funded and it's in planning. I can get a note back to this committee following this meeting on when it will be implemented. But it is very, very shortly from my understanding, but I'll get you some exact dates from Jason Schneider.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's all the questions I have. Mr. Winston, if you don't have any more questions and there's nothing else for the good, then I have a motion to adjourn.
Second, aye.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.